Some years ago, in Saudi Arabia, a neurologist named Abdullah Al-Said went walking through a lava field called Harat Khaybar and passed low walls of stacked stone without a second thought. Years later, he saw the same field from above on Google Earth, and the walls turned out to be shapes laid out like farm gates, some of them nearly 500 meters end to end. Researchers would go on to count around 400 of them, and structures of this family have been dated to 7,000 years old. That is older than the pyramids. In Bolivia, a research team writing in the journal Nature fired lasers down through the jungle canopy, and the forest floor came back covered in cities. There were pyramid mounds 22 meters tall and raised roads running straight through the trees for kilometers at a stretch. And in the mountains of Peru, there are pyramid complexes that no archaeologist has ever excavated or surveyed or even named. Officially, they do not exist. Your phone can give you directions to any address on Earth, and its satellites have photographed every square meter of this planet. But there are ancient structures, magnificent ones, that Google Maps will not show you. Zoom in on the places you just saw, and the map hands you an empty tile because no one has ever attached a name to them. The structures are there, the labels are not. Tonight we are going to visit 10 of them, one by one, from the steppe of Kazakhstan to the floor of the Amazon. And stay for the last one, because the people who found it chose to keep it off the map on purpose. Once you see what is sitting inside it, you might decide they were right. We begin in the grass of northern Kazakhstan with an economist who was not looking for anything at all. In 2007, in the city of Kostanay in northern Kazakhstan, an economist named Dmitry Day sat down at his computer and opened Google Earth. He was not a scientist, and he was not on anyone's payroll. He was an archaeology enthusiast with a strange question, which was whether his own country might be hiding a pyramid. So he did the only thing a man with a desktop computer can do, and he started scrolling square by square across one of the emptiest landscapes on Earth. The Turgai region is a place most Kazakhs will never visit. The land is so flat and so empty that a rise of 1 meter counts as terrain, and the grass runs unbroken to the horizon in every direction. From the ground, it shows you nothing at all. But from 700 kilometers up, the grass began to organize. What resolved on Day's screen was a square drawn on the earth in 101 raised mounds, with 2 rows of mounds running corner to corner through the middle like an X inside a frame. By his own measurement, each side runs 284 meters, and the whole figure covers 8 hectares, which is more ground than the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. You could lay 11 football fields inside it and still have grass left over. They did what anyone would do and searched for its name. The square has no name. It was not in the archaeological registries, it was not in the historical record, and it was not on the map he was looking at, because no one had ever attached a label to it. He was looking at a monument the size of a city block in a country with a national space agency, and as far as the record was concerned, it did not exist, and it was not alone. As they kept scrolling, the steppe kept producing figures. There was a 3-armed spiral, now called the Turgai Triketra, and there were crosses, rings, and long straight embankments, all built from the same earthen mounds, and all invisible from the ground. Over the following years, Day and the researchers who joined him counted roughly 260 of these earthworks, and even today, only 127 of them have been officially registered. That gap matters because it means there are more unregistered monuments in this one stretch of grass than registered ones. In 2014, the findings were presented to the scientific community, and the reaction was quiet disbelief followed by satellites. NASA began prioritizing photography of the Turgai region and released its own images of the figures from orbit, because when a monument is too large to see from the ground, orbit is simply the correct distance to study it from. Then the archaeologists arrived with shovels, and this is where the story turns. They cut into the mounds, expecting what mounds usually hold, which is graves or tools or hearths. The excavations found no artifacts under the mounds at all. There was no burial, no pottery, and no floor. Whoever built the square moved thousands of tons of earth into a precise geometric figure and then left nothing of themselves inside it. The mounds are not graves. They are marks. So the question became the age of the marks, and here the science stopped agreeing. One luminescence result, which dates the last time buried soil saw sunlight, put a mound at roughly 8000 BC, and that is older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, and older than writing. Day's own team argues the earliest figures are about 9000 years old, and they point to the Mahanjar culture, hunter-gatherers who lived along these riverbeds at exactly that time. But other estimates run thousands of years younger, and the honest answer is that the scientists who study the square cannot agree on its age to within 5000 years. The purpose is argued the same way. Scientists at Vilnius University in Lithuania read the figures as border constructions, marking which tribe held which land. The archaeological laboratory at Kostanay Regional University reads them as cult structures, sanctuaries built by the early nomads. And Day's project argues they were solar observatories, calendars of earth and grass built by people who needed to know when winter was coming. That is 3 serious teams, 3 serious answers, and no way yet to choose between them. But hold on to the one fact every team agrees on. Whoever built this built it to be permanent, and built it in a shape that no builder standing on the ground could ever have seen finished. The figure only exists from the sky. For at least 3000 years, and possibly for 10,000, the only eyes that could have read the Turgai square belonged to the birds. And then in 2007, an economist with a desktop computer became the first human being to see it whole. The step kept that secret in plain sight, and it makes you wonder how many other places are doing the same thing right now. Before we move on, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from, because the next empty spot on the map might be closer to you than you think. Because a shape in the grass is one kind of invisible. A building is supposed to be another matter entirely. A building has walls and rooms and a front door, and somewhere in the Algerian Sahara there is a 3-story fortress standing alone in an ocean of dunes that has all of those things and no history at all. Unlike the square, nobody even had to dig to be confused. About 30 kilometers north of the town of Timimun, in the southwest of Algeria, the road ends and the Grand Erg Occidental begins. It is a sea of sand the size of a small country, and for most of the year nothing moves in it except the wind. But in the middle of those dunes there is a building. It is round and it is big. 2 circular walls stand one inside the other, and the outer wall rises about 10 meters, which is the height of a 3-story house, and in places it is 2 meters thick. There is one way in. There are no windows on the outside at all. Inside, the structure climbs through 3 levels and the rooms are still there. There are living quarters, there are communal kitchens, and there is a mosque. Somebody built a complete walled town out in the sand, and then everybody left. This is Ksardra, and it is one of the best preserved fortified villages in the whole region. You can walk through its front door today. So here is the strange part. Open the archaeological record on Ksardra and you will find nothing, because there is no excavation report, no survey, no dig, and no date. The building has been standing in plain sight for centuries, and nobody has ever put a shovel in it. Even the basic facts argue with each other. The encyclopedia entry says the walls are sand, straw, and clay, which is how the Sahara usually builds. But the photographer George Steinmetz, who flew over it on a motorized paraglider for the New Yorker, wrote that it was virtually intact, circular, and made of stone, not mud brick. 2 descriptions of the same wall, and no one has checked. What the record does have is the land around it, and that land has a history. The oasis country south of here is called the Tuat, and in the Middle Ages, its capital, Tamentit, was one of the gateways of the trans-Saharan trade. In 1447, a Genoese merchant named Antonio Malfante wrote home from Tamentit, and he described a town full of jewelers and smiths and learned men, with caravans arriving from the south carrying gold. He also wrote that the Jewish community there lived under the protection of several rulers and enjoyed a secure standing. That security lasted 45 more years. In 1492, a preacher from Tlemcen named Muhammad al-Magili arrived in the Tuat, and he incited a mob that destroyed the synagogue at Tamentit. The historian Jacob Oliel wrote the standard study of the Jews of the Tuat, and the record he and others assembled says what followed. Those who were not killed fled into the desert, and those who stayed were forced to convert. The chroniclers say al-Magili put a price in gold on every Jewish head. And that is where the first theory about Qassadra comes from. A round fortress with one door and no windows, a day's walk out into the dunes, built by people who needed to disappear. It is a good story. It is also so far only a story, because nobody has found a single object inside the fortress that belongs to those families or to anyone else. There are 3 other theories, and they are just as unproven. The building sits near the old caravan routes, so it may have been a caravanserai, a fortified inn where the gold caravans rested and paid for water. Its walls are thick enough to hold a garrison, so it may have been a military outpost watching the approaches to the oases. And because it has exactly one entrance, some people who have stood inside it think it was a prison. 4 theories, 1 building, and no evidence for any of them, because evidence is what a dig produces, and there has never been one. Now look at where it sits on the map. The town of Timimun is there, with its red mud architecture and its palm gardens. The roads are there. The dunes are there, ridge after ridge of them. And at the coordinates of the fortress, the map shows you a small ring in the sand and not one word. That is the pattern you are going to see again and again tonight. The places that survive the longest are often the ones nobody writes down, because nobody writes down what nobody visits. Somebody stacked 10 meters of wall in the middle of nothing and then walked away, and we do not know who or when or why. The fortress is there. The file is empty. Before we go on, if you like this kind of mystery, hit subscribe, because the next one is the opposite problem. In Jordan, there are rings of stone so big that people walked through them for 2,000 years without noticing they were rings. They only appeared when somebody looked down from an aeroplane. On the 2nd of February 1926, a Royal Air Force pilot named Percy Maitland was flying the airmail run from Cairo to Baghdad, and below his aircraft there was nothing but black rock, a field of basalt that ran to the horizon in every direction. The route was only a few years old, and the desert beneath it had almost never been seen from above, because until the airmail planes came, no one had ever had the height to look down on it. And then Maitland saw shapes in the rock, patterns too regular to be accidents, and he reached for his camera. What he had found, the Bedouin who lived out there already knew, and they had a name for it, which was the works of the old men. Maitland published the first account of these stone figures in 1927, in the opening volume of the journal Antiquity, and he described a desert scribbled over with walls and rings and long trailing lines of piled rock. Some of the shapes were small and easy to miss. The largest of them were the circles, and the circles were the reason people kept coming back. The big circles, as archaeologists would later call them, are rings of stone laid flat on the desert floor, and they are all very nearly the same size, and each one runs from about 220 meters across to about 455 meters across. The largest is roughly 3 times the width of an Olympic running track. They are built from local boulders, roughly cut and stacked into walls that stand no more than about 1 meter high, which is a wall you could step over without slowing down. And that is the first strange thing about them, because from the ground you cannot see a circle at all. you see a low line of rock running off to either side, and it never closes into a shape your eye can hold. The ring only exists from the air. For most of the 20th century, the circles sat in the photographic archive as curiosities recorded from above but never really studied until an archaeologist named David Kennedy took them seriously. Kennedy, who works at the University of Western Australia, has run the Aerial Archaeology in Jordan project since 1997, and he co-directs the Aerial Photographic Archive for Archaeology in the Middle East, which is known as APAM. In 2013, he published the first proper study of the big circles in the German journal Zeitschrift für Orientarchäologie, and he counted at least 12 of them in Jordan, and one more stands near Homs in Syria. What caught his attention was the sizing, because the diameters sit so close together that he described the match as too close to be a coincidence. And yet, each one would have been cheap to build. Kennedy estimated that about a dozen workers could lay out a big circle in roughly a week using nothing but local rock and a rope tied to a post to scribe the curve. So that leaves the hardest question, which is what the circles were built to do. The ordinary answer, the one you reach for first, is livestock, because a ring of wall in open country looks like a pen for holding sheep or goats. But Kennedy does not think the circles were corrals, and his reasons are plain. The walls are far too low to hold an animal in, barely knee-height in places, and there are no gaps built as gateways, and there is none of the trampled ground or worn tracks or secondary pens that herding always leaves behind. They were never stock pens. They were not forts either, for the same reason, because you cannot defend a wall a goat could jump. Some circles do have small stone cairns sitting on their rims, and for a while those looked like graves, but the cairns seem to have been added much later, piled on top of the rings long after whatever they first meant had been forgotten. The dating is worse. Nobody has a secure date for a single big circle, because the circles contain no hearth, no pottery, and no buried floor that a laboratory could date. The best clue is indirect, and it comes from a single Roman road that runs dead straight across a circle and simply ignores it, which means the ring was already there, already old, before the Romans laid that road. So the big circles are at least 2,000 years old, and some researchers think they reach far deeper than that, back into the Chalcolithic or the early Bronze Age, which would make them 4,000, 5,000, even 6,000 years old. No one can prove it either way. And the circles are not even the oldest marks out there. Across the same basalt fields, there are more than 1,000 stone wheels, rings with spokes that radiate out from a central hub, and they cluster most thickly around the oasis at Azraq. In 2016, a team led by Gary Rollofson published the first hard dates for any of these works in the journal Antiquity using a method called optically stimulated luminescence, which reads the last time a buried grain of sediment saw the sun. One wheel came back as late Neolithic, and another sat right at the edge of the Bronze Age, so the wheels are several thousand years old, and one wheel near Azraq has been reported at roughly 8 to 500 years old, and someone repaired it about 5,500 years ago. That makes the oldest of them thousands of years older than the Nazca lines of Peru. So here is what the record actually holds. Somebody, thousands of years ago, walked out into one of the emptiest deserts on Earth and laid down rings of rock so wide you cannot see them while standing inside them, so low they held nothing in and kept nothing out, and then walked away without leaving a grave, a tool, or a single word about why. We have the circles. We do not have the reason. And these rings may not even be where the story starts, because next door, in the deserts of northern Saudi Arabia, there are shapes older still, long rectangles of stone laid out flat across the ground, and the first dates coming back from them run older than the pyramids of Egypt. In 2004, in the northwest of Saudi Arabia, a neurologist named Abdullah Al-Said walked out across a black lava field called Harat Khaybar, and he stepped over low lines of stacked stone without stopping to look. They stood ankle-high and half-buried, and they ran off across the black rock in shapes he could not read. So he did what a reasonable person does with a thing that makes no sense from the ground, which is nothing at all. In 2008, he opened updated satellite imagery of the same field on Google Earth, and the stone lines resolved into rectangles. From above, they looked like the field gates of the English countryside, two solid posts joined by long bars. So Al-Said sent his coordinates to David Kennedy, who was then a professor of aerial archaeology at the University of Western Australia. Kennedy went hunting through the imagery, and across Harat Geiba he mapped nearly 400 of these structures, and he named them the gates. The gates were only the first strange thing anyone had noticed here, and they were not the oldest. Scattered across the same corner of Arabia in far larger numbers, there is a second kind of structure, and its name is simply the shape it makes. Mustatil is the Arabic word for rectangle. A mustatil is a low-walled rectangle built from stone with a thick end the researchers call the head, a thick end they call the base, and two or more long walls that connect them around an open courtyard. The scale is the surprise. The smallest run about 20 meters end to end, the largest stretch past 600 meters, and the biggest one surveyed for the 2021 study measures 525 meters, out on the same Harat Geiba lava field where Al-Said had been walking all along. And there are a great many of them. The team behind the main study photographed over 350 mustatils from the air and identified a further 641 through satellite imagery, which put the known total above 1,000 structures across roughly 200,000 square kilometers of desert. Later survey work pushed that number higher still, and the count now runs past 1,600. The people doing the counting were not hobbyists. The main study appeared in 2021 in the journal Antiquity, and it was written by Hugh Thomas, Melissa Kennedy, Matthew Dalton and their colleagues, then archaeologists at the University of Western Australia, and they ran their survey for the Royal Commission for Alula. They excavated one of the structures, they carbon dated the material inside it, and the result came back deep in the late Neolithic. In plain numbers, the mustatils were built between roughly 5300 and 4900 BC, which makes them at least 7,000 years old. That date is the reason this chapter exists. It means these rectangles were finished roughly 2,000 years before the first block of the Egyptian pyramids was cut, and before the great stones ever went up at Stonehenge. And when the builders were at work, this ground was not desert yet, but green grassland studded with lakes, and it was full of cattle. So the real question is why anyone built them, and the plain answers are the first to collapse. They were not forts because the long walls stand only 0.3 to 1.2 meters high, and a grown adult can step across them. They were not pens for livestock either, because the gaps left for entrances run as narrow as 0.3 meters, too tight to drive a herd through, and the walls are far too low to hold one in. The walls could not stop a goat. The answer turned up when the team put a trench into the head. When they excavated that thick chamber at one end, dug in places below the surface, they found no tools and no houses and no graves, but bones, and the bones had been sorted. There were skulls and horns and pieces of upper skull arranged around upright stones, and most of them came from cattle, though some goat and some gazelle were mixed in too. The cattle were mostly male, aged between 2 and 12 years, and only the skulls and horns were kept, which is the signature of an offering rather than a meal. Set into the chamber of at least one mustatil, the team found a standing stone, and they read up to 3 of these uprights as betels, sacred stones that stand in for a god. Which god, no one can say. Hugh Thomas has said the structures were built for ritual in the Neolithic, and that the ritual meant sacrificing wild and tame animals to a deity or to deities that no one has been able to name. That is as far as the evidence reaches, and it stops there halt. Nobody knows what god the cattle were killed to feed. Nobody knows why the offering had to be made inside a rectangle longer than a city block, when a fire and a flat stone would have served. And nobody knows why they built more than 1,000 of them, across an area the size of a small country, in a shape whose full outline no one on the ground could ever see. So the largest of these rectangles is older than the pyramids, longer than a football stadium, and built for a god no living person can name. Before we move on, if you like a mystery that is real, hit subscribe, because the next one takes the same idea and bends it into a circle. Follow the belt of desert and dried grassland west, all the way across Africa to the Atlantic coast, and near the border of Senegal and Gambia, the rectangles give way to rings. People there cut standing stones and raised them by the thousand, in circle after circle, and for a long time no one could say who raised them. In 1903, near the village of Dialato in Senegal, a French army officer named Captain Duchemin ordered his men to start digging into one of the strange stone rings that stood in the bush. He was not the first person to notice them, because local farmers had lived among these fields of standing pillars for generations, and they knew the stones marked something in the ground. But Duchemin ran the first recorded excavation of one of the rings, and when the spades went down inside it, they struck bone. Underneath the circle, the diggers found a grave. That ring was one of thousands. The monuments run in a band about 100 kilometers wide and roughly 350 kilometers long, following the river Gambia through Senegal and into the country now called the Gambia. Along that band stand more than 1,000 stone monuments, and the number of individual carved pillars most often cited is 28,930. The stones are cut from laterite, a hard, iron-rich rock that weathers to a rust-red crust in the open air, and each pillar stands about 2 meters tall and weighs around 7 tons. The tallest one still standing, at a site called Wasu in the Gambia, reaches 2.59 meters. They are set into rings that hold anywhere from 8 to 24 stones and measure 4 to 7 meters across, and the rings repeat in clusters for kilometer after kilometer. UNESCO, which added 4 of the groups to the World Heritage List in 2006, calls it an extraordinary concentration, and it is commonly described as the largest single grouping of stone circles anywhere on Earth. The 4 protected groups only hint at the full scale. Across a wider zone of about 30,000 square kilometers, surveyors have recorded something on the order of 17,000 monuments at close to 2,000 separate sites, which comes out to roughly 1 standing monument for every square kilometer of ground. A survey in 1982 alone logged about 1,145 sites. In Senegal, there is Sinengayen, the largest single site, where 1,102 carved stones stand in 52 circles, and one of those circles is a double ring. Nearby, Wana holds 21 circles. Across the border in the Gambia, Wasu holds about 11 circles, and Kerbach holds about 9. Within these rings, the shapes are not all alike, because most of the pillars are plain cylinders or polygons, but some are topped with carved knobs, and a few are cut into a rare lyre shape. At Kerbach, there is one famous stone that splits into a V at the top, a bifid stone, as though a single pillar grew 2 arms. The people who quarried these stones left their workshop behind. The laterite quarry the builders used lies about 1 kilometer east of Sinengayen, and the surface there still holds the scoops where cylindrical stones were cut straight out of the rock, along with the grooves where tools were sharpened and the basins worn into the stone. Archaeologists have traced roughly 150 of the pillars back to that one quarry. The stones were cut by hand, dressed, dragged to the rings, and lowered upright into the pits that had been dug to receive them. This much is documented in an excavation record that runs back more than a century. The Anglo-Gambian Stone Circle expedition, led by the archaeologist Paul Ozan, excavated Wasu and Kerbach in 1964 and 1965. Luc Laporte and Hamadi Bokoum returned to these sites later, and their radiocarbon study of the circles at Wanar was published in the journal Antiquity in 2012. So the boring part is answered. We know what the stones are made of, where they were cut, how they were raised, and what lies beneath them, which is the dead. The circles are graves or grave markers, part of a burial ground that also holds hundreds of earthen mounds, and as far as that explanation goes, it holds. What it does not settle is when the circles were built and by whom and why in this exact form. UNESCO gives the accepted span for the whole burial ground as running from the 3rd century BC to the 16th century AD, which is more than 1,500 years of use. But when Laporte and Boccum radiocarbon dated the circles at Wanar, the standing stones themselves came out far later and far tighter, raised mainly in the 12th and 13th centuries AD over a stretch of maybe 200 years, on top of ground that had already served as a cemetery for centuries. Other work points to activity as early as roughly 1300 BC at Sin and Guyenne. So the dates refuse to settle into one clean story, and the chronology of the standing circles is still argued over. And the deeper question stays open. Nobody knows exactly which people cut and raised close to 29,000 pillars, nobody knows why they chose the ring, and nobody knows what the double circles and the lyre stones and the split V-stone at Kirbach were meant to mean. Dr. P. Juene, who surveyed about 15 of the monuments in the 1910s and 1920s and drew the first map of Sin and Guyenne, proposed some kind of solar or farming ritual, but that was only a guess and it stayed a guess. The builders left no names. For more than 1,000 years, people carried 7-ton stones out of a quarry and stood them upright in rings above their dead across 350 kilometers of West Africa, and then the practice stopped, and the memory of who did it thinned away, and the rings were left to the grass and the birds. At least here, the stones are clearly worked, clearly cut, and clearly raised by human hands. The next place is not so clear, because on the island of Java in Indonesia there is a hill covered in trees and old stone terraces that a handful of researchers insist is not a hill at all, and they say that something is buried inside it. In 1979, above the village of Karyamukti in West Java, a few local farmers climbed a steep hill they had always known, and near the top they found rows of stone columns lying in the grass, arranged in flat terraces that stepped down the slope. The site was not new to the records. Dutch colonial authorities had noted the terraces back in 1890, and the archaeologist Nicolaas Johannes Krom recorded them again in 1914, but the hill had slipped out of memory until the farmers brought it back. What they had walked onto is called Gunung Padang, and it sits at roughly 885 meters above sea level on the flank of an extinct volcano. It is the largest megalithic site in Indonesia. The hill is shaped into 5-step terraces that shrink as they rise, and hundreds of volcanic columns cover them, andesite blocks with natural hexagonal sides that each run about 1 to 3 meters long. You reach the top by climbing a stone staircase of about 370 steps, pitched close to 45 degrees, up a terraced slope that rises nearly 95 meters. For most of the 20th century, nobody argued much about it. The government declared the surrounding 29 hectares a national site area in June 2014, and by then the debate about the hill was already turning into something louder. The mainstream reading is calm and specific. Archaeologists call Gunung Padang a Punden Berundak, a Sundanese stepped platform for ritual, and they say it sits on top of a natural volcanic hill. Lutfi Yondri, an archaeologist at Universitas Padjadjaran in Bandung, has excavated the site across roughly 3 decades, and he dates the earliest stone building to about 2,000 years ago. The charcoal that fixes that date came from under the retaining walls, and it clusters around 100 BC. Another archaeologist, Harry Truman Simanjuntak, has argued that the terraces came even later, and he points to the first millennium AD. In that version, the story stays ordinary, because people terraced a hill and worshipped on it a long time ago, and nothing about it breaks the timeline. Then a geologist arrived with a drill. Danny Hillman Natawijaja is not an archaeologist. He is an earthquake and tectonic specialist who earned his PhD in geology at Caltech in 1998, and he works at Indonesia's National Research Agency. His team ran a geophysical survey across the hill in the early 2010s, using ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity and seismic scans, and they drilled cores down to around 30 meters. What they reported was not a natural hill at all. They said the hill held structure under the surface, that beneath the visible terraces lay chambers and older layers that had been shaped and then deliberately buried, and that Gunung Padang was not a hill with a temple on top, but a pyramid that people had built and then hidden across thousands of years. The claim landed in a peer-reviewed journal in October 2023. The paper ran in the Wiley journal Archaeological Prospection, and it listed Natawijaya plus 10 co-authors, one of whom was the archaeologist Ali Akbar of Universitas Indonesia. It laid out construction phases that went back further than anything in the record. The deepest phase, they wrote, was built between roughly 25,000 and 14,000 BC, which is about 27,000 years before now, and then the builders walked away. Later phases followed around 7,900 BC and again around 6,000 BC, and the team said the builders buried the old work on purpose and added the visible stone terraces only in the last few thousand years. If it held, Gunung Padang would be the oldest pyramid on Earth, and it would predate farming and pottery. The trouble was what the dates were actually measuring. The team had radiocarbon dated soil pulled from the cores, but soil is not a building. Outside experts in geophysics, archaeology, and radiocarbon dating looked at the paper and said the buried dirt showed no sign of human work, no tools, no walls, no floors, nothing that marked it as made. Flint Dibble, an archaeologist at Cardiff University, reviewed it in early 2024 and said the conclusion did not match the evidence in the body of the paper. The journal retracted the paper in March 2024. The editors, Eileen Ernenwein and Gregory Sokas, agreed with the publisher that the dating carried a major error because the samples came from natural soil with nothing man-made attached, so the claim of a 9,000-year-old pyramid could not stand. Peer review had missed it. Natawijaya and his co-authors disagreed, and they still do. They had dated the dirt, not the pyramid, and that is where the two hills part. In one hill, the columns are natural volcanic rock that people stacked and terraced about 2,000 years ago, and the deep layers are just old lava that cooled into hexagons. In the other, the volcano is only a shell around something that people built 27,000 years ago and then hid on purpose. The retraction settled the paper. It did not settle the believers. Gunung Padang had already featured in the first episode of Ancient Apocalypse, a Netflix series presented by the writer Graham Hancock, who called the retraction unjust, and the argument moved out of the journals and onto screens, where it still runs. Gunung Padang is one hill, and the fight is over whether people built it or whether the earth did. But not far away, across the water in Cambodia, there is a case where nobody argues about who built it, and the only question is how something that large could vanish. A whole city, streets and reservoirs and temples was swallowed by the jungle and lost for centuries, and when it was found again, the scale of what had been hidden was almost harder to believe than any buried pyramid. In April of 2012, a helicopter took off from Siem Reap in northern Cambodia with a laser scanner bolted under its belly, and it began flying back and forth over the forest in long, straight, overlapping lines. On board was an Australian archaeologist named Damien Evans, who had spent years working around the ruins of Angkor and who wanted to know what the trees were covering. The scanner fired pulses of light down at the canopy, and most of that light caught in the leaves and the branches, but a small fraction of it slipped through the gaps, struck the ground, and came back up. Over about 20 hours in the air, the survey swept roughly 370 square kilometers of jungle, and then the slow work began, which was teaching a computer to erase every tree from the picture. When the trees were stripped out of the data, what was left was the bare surface of the Earth, drawn as a shaded grey relief, and across one part of that map, over a plateau called Phnom Kulen, the ground was not blank. It was ruled with straight lines. Long axes ran north to south, and others crossed east to west, and between them the land was carved into a grid of squares, each about 1.5 kilometers on a side, the blocks of a city that no map had ever recorded. The whole grid stretched across something like 40 to 50 square kilometers of forest, with its longest line running about 15 kilometers from end to end, and it did not sit in open country, but on top of a mountain. Inside that plan, the survey found the outlines of dams and reservoirs, and one of the reservoirs was enormous, a rectangular basin about 1,050 meters long and 330 meters wide, which would have drowned more than 35 hectares if it had ever been filled. It was never filled. Scattered across the plateau there were also 366 earthen mounds set out in 15 separate groups, and among them stood temple platforms that had been started and then left unfinished. The first pass from that 2012 flight was published the next year in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, where Evans and his colleagues reported a formally planned city that nothing on the surface had ever shown. That first survey had only clipped the edge of the plateau, about 37 square kilometers of it, so in 2015 a much larger project went back. It was called the Cambodian Archaeological LiDAR Initiative, paid for by a European research grant and again led by Damien Evans, and this time the flights covered about 1,901 square kilometers in roughly 90 hours, with close to 975 of those square kilometers laid over Phnom Kulen alone. Only then did the true size of the place come clear. In 2019, in the journal Antiquity, an archaeologist named Jean-Baptiste Chevans, who had spent years surveying that plateau on foot, led the paper that finally gave the city its name. They called it Mahendra Parvata, which means the mountain of the great Indra, and the name was not invented for the study because it was already written into the inscriptions of the Khmer in an account carved centuries afterward on a temple wall at a place called Sdok Kok Tom. Those inscriptions tie the mountain to a king named Jayavarman II, who was declared a universal monarch here in the year 802 in the ceremony that tradition treats as the beginning of the Khmer Empire. Before those flights, Mahendra Parvata had been little more than a name on old stone, known from the inscriptions and from a scatter of temples that Chevanse and others had reached by walking the plateau, and no one had ever seen it as one connected city. That makes Mahendra Parvata older than Angkor Wat by about 300 years, and it sits some 40 kilometers north of the temple that most people picture when they think of Cambodia. There is a plain explanation for how a city this size could go missing, and most of it is simply time and trees. Mahendra Parvata was an early capital, and the center of Khmer power later moved down onto the plains to the temples and canals of Angkor, and once the mountain was no longer the seat of a king, the forest did what forests do and close over the whole plan. That accounts for the forgetting. What it does not account for is the state the city was left in, because the design on the plateau is far larger than anything that was ever finished on it. The great reservoir was cut but never flooded, several of the temple mounds were begun but never topped out, and much of the grid reads like a drawing of a city rather than the record of one that was ever fully lived in. That is the strange part of Mahendra Parvata, and it is the part the laser made visible for the first time. The plan outlived the city. For more than 1,000 years, the design lay complete on the mountain, block by block and axis by axis, while the thing it described was only ever partly real, and no one alive had ever seen the whole of it because no one standing on the ground could get far enough back. It took a machine in the sky, firing light down through the leaves to draw the map that the builders themselves may never have finished. Phnom Kulen was hidden by something soft and slow, by leaves and roots that needed centuries to swallow it, and a laser could reach through all of that. But not every lost city is buried under something a beam of light can see past. On the other side of the world, in Mexico, there is a place where an entire settlement disappeared under something hard and black and heavy, a sheet of black lava that poured out of the ground and set into solid rock. The trees on Phnom Kulen grew slowly. What covered the city in Mexico did not. In 2007, in the highlands of the Mexican state of Michoacan, an archaeologist named Christopher Fisher led a line of graduate students out onto a field of broken black lava rock. They walked slowly, a few meters apart, heads down, because that is how ground survey has always worked, and they were scanning the rubble for potsherds and wall stubs and the low mounds that mark old tombs. Fisher was a professor at Colorado State University, and the survey was part of a long program he called Legacies of Resilience, the Lake Pátzcuaro Archaeology Project. The field he was crossing was a malpais, a hardened lava flow, and it turned every step into a small argument with your ankles. It was brutal country to walk, and it was slow, and after several seasons of it, his crews had covered only about 4 square kilometers on foot. In that one patch, they logged more than 7,000 architectural features by boot, which was already a great deal, and it told Fisher there was a real settlement out here under the brush. But the malpais ran on for kilometers in every direction, and no line of walkers was ever going to cross all of it, because the rock and the vegetation hid almost everything more than a few steps away. So Fisher did what a small number of archaeologists were just then beginning to do, and he put the survey in the air. In 2011, a firm called Merrick and Company flew a LiDAR rig over the lower half of the malpais, firing hundreds of thousands of laser pulses a second at the ground and timing the return of each one. LiDAR can do something the human eye cannot, because enough of those pulses slip through the gaps in the canopy to touch bare rock, and the computer can then strip the trees away and leave only the shape of the land. A second and larger flight in 2015, flown by the National Center for Airborne Laser Mapping, covered around 35 square kilometers of the flow and the ground around it. And when the bare earth map resolved on the screen, the field of rubble the students had been crawling across turned into a city. There were building foundations everywhere, and not thousands of them, but tens of thousands. Fisher counted more than 40,000 of them across the malpais, which is, as he put it, roughly the same number of building foundations as there are on the island of Manhattan. He laid out the full scale of the place in February of 2018 at the annual meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Austin, Texas, and it was the size of it that stopped the room. The built-up ground alone runs past 12 square kilometers, and the widest city sprawls across something closer to 25. That made Angamuco larger in area than Tzintzuntzan itself, roughly twice the size of the capital, where the Purepecha kings ruled the one empire the Aztecs never conquered, though the lava city was the more thinly settled of the two. The city belonged to the Purepecha, also called the Tarascans, and the earliest pottery and radiocarbon dates put people on the malpais by about 900 AD. It reached its height between roughly 1000 and 1350, and it was folded into the Purepecha Empire after that, and it held on until the Spanish came, before it was fully abandoned in the late 1500s. How many people lived there at the peak is where the honest answer turns awkward. Fisher's high estimate, the one that carried the headlines in 2018, was more than 100,000, which would have made Angamuco the most populous place in all of western Mexico in its day. The peer-reviewed figure is far more cautious, and the journal Ancient Mesoamerica puts it at over 30,000. Both numbers are built on counting foundations, and the truth sits somewhere in that gap, and no one can yet close it. The mundane part of the mystery is why the city stayed hidden for so long, and that part has a clean answer. The lava rock broke every sightline, the vegetation covered the rest, and no one on foot could see more than a fragment at a time, which is exactly why 7,000 features on the ground became more than 40,000 from the air. But that explains only why we missed it. It does not explain why anyone built it here to begin with. Amalpais is miserable ground to live on, all jagged rock and thin soil and no easy water, and yet tens of thousands of people chose this lava flow over the gentler land around the lake. And when the map is laid flat, the city breaks a second expectation because the pyramids and plazas and ball courts and roads and cemeteries do not gather in one grand center the way they do at most capitals. They cluster instead at about 8 separate places around the rim, as though the city had 8 hearts and no single middle, and why it grew that way is still argued over. Nobody knows why they chose the lava. So Angamuko, in the end, is a place that finally got counted. More than 40,000 foundations, somewhere between 30,000 and 100,000 people, a number for the ground and a number for the crowd, all of it pulled into the record by a machine in a plane. Further south though, down the long coast of Peru, there are structures that were never counted at all because no official map marks them and no official survey lists them. They are pyramids. And by the record that is meant to hold them, they are not there. In early July of 2013, on the northern edge of Lima at a site called El Paraíso, a watchman looked up and saw bulldozers. 2 private construction firms had driven their machines onto the land and they were clearing it for housing, and one of the things standing in their way was a pyramid. It was roughly 5,000 years old and it stood about 6 meters tall, which is close to 20 feet, and by the time anyone reached it, the machines had knocked it down and set part of it burning. Peru's culture officials arrived and said the developers would have flattened 3 more pyramids on the same land if an archaeologist and the watchman had not stopped them. El Paraíso is one of the oldest monumental sites in Peru. It had stood for 5,000 years and it was gone in an afternoon. What happened at El Paraíso is not rare because Peru is carrying more ancient stone and adobe than it can afford to guard. News agencies covering the country's heritage, including AFP, have put the number of pre-colonial sites at roughly 46,000, and the city of Lima alone sits on about 400 of them, which is the largest concentration in any city in South America. Official estimates say the state can protect only about 1% of these places, so the rest sit exposed in fields and suburbs and desert, and they wait for a bulldozer or a shovel. And most of them have never been excavated at all. To understand what is being lost, you have to go about 200 kilometers north of Lima into the Super Valley to a site called Caral. For most of the 20th century, it looked like a set of low desert hills. An archaeologist named Ruth Shady reached the valley in the mid-1990s, and when her team dug into the fill of the largest mound, they found reed-carrying bags packed with stones, and those bags are called shikras. The plant fiber inside them could be dated. In 2001, in the journal Science, Ruth Shady, Jonathan Haas and Winifred Creamer published the results, and the oldest samples placed the building of Caral at about 2627 BC. That date rewrote the timeline of the Americas because it means Caral was rising while the Egyptians were stacking the pyramids at Giza. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is dated to roughly 2560 BC, so both were built on opposite sides of the planet at nearly the same time, by people who could not have known the other existed. Caral is now considered the oldest known city in the Americas, and it predates the Olmec of Mesoamerica by around 1,500 years. Its core covers 60 hectares with 6 large platform mounds and sunken circular plazas and monumental staircases, and the largest of them, the Pyramid Mayo, dominates the whole site. In 2009, UNESCO listed it as a World Heritage Site. And this is the part that unsettles the people who study it. Caral was as old as Egypt's pyramids, and yet the outside world knew nothing about its true age until the late 1990s. It had been noted by a German archaeologist, Max Uhl, back in 1905 and mapped again by Paul Kosok in 1948. But for roughly 90 years it sat in plain sight, unrecognized because no one had dug deep enough to date it. If a city this old could vanish in plain sight for that long after it had already been found, the obvious question is how many more are out there that no one has found at all? The boring answer is that Peru has too much ground and too little money, and so most of it stays uncatalogued. A large share of its sites are known to specialists, but never formally registered or published. A review of Peruvian Ministry of Culture archives found more than 400 known but unpublished sites in the Amazon region of Loreto alone, and one study reported that only 36% of 415 sites in the Peruvian Amazon had been registered with the ministry at all. Where sites are published, archaeologists often leave the coordinates out on purpose, because printing an exact location is an invitation to looters. Those looters have a name in Peru. A huaquero is someone who digs illegally into a huaca, an ancient sacred mound, to pull out huacos, the pots and objects that sell. A huaquero is usually not an organized criminal, but a poor local farmer with a shovel. The damage is enormous. Surveys have found looting scars on more than 90% of the famous sites on the north coast, and in the Viru Valley the looters' pits grew so dense that you can see them from space, and they show up as pale clusters of holes in the satellite imagery, and they keep spreading year after year. So the pyramids that do not exist are real, and yet they are, in a strict sense, impossible to show you. The registered ones, like Caral, can be photographed and walked. The unregistered ones cannot be pointed to, because pointing to them is exactly what would get them dug up. We know they exist only in aggregate, in the site counts and the looting surveys and the withheld coordinates, and it is a strange kind of knowing, because it can count the pyramids and it can never name a single one of them. Nobody knows how many there are. But there is one more structure in this series, and it was not lost to neglect, and it was not ground down by huaqueros with shovels. Someone kept it off the map on purpose. And down on the floor of the Amazon, where almost no one will ever go looking, it is still waiting. In 2019, over the Llanos de Moyos in the Bolivian Amazon, a helicopter flew low across a forest that most people had written off. The savanna below floods for half the year, the soils are thin and sour, and for a century archaeologists had agreed that nothing large could ever have lived here. Bolted to the underside of the helicopter was a scanner that fired roughly 1.5 million laser pulses every second straight down through the canopy, and it timed the exact moment each pulse bounced back. Most of them caught leaves and branches. A few slipped through the gaps and touched the actual ground, and those were the ones that mattered. The man behind the survey was Heiko Prumas, an archaeologist with the German Archaeological Institute, working alongside colleagues from the University of Bonn, the University of Exeter, and a scanning firm called Arctron 3D. His team covered about 204 square kilometers in 6 blocks, and then they did the slow, patient part, which was to delete the forest. Software stripped away every pulse that had struck a leaf and kept only the pulses that had reached the earth, so what remained was a clean model of the ground with the trees gone. Prumer said it plainly. The first results were excellent and showed how effective the technology was even in dense rainforest. What resolved on the bare earth model was not a village. It was a city. The largest sites already had names, Kotoka and Landiva, because people had walked past their mounds for generations, but nobody had ever seen either one whole. Kotoka covered 147 hectares. Landiva ran to 315. At the center of each sat a civic core built entirely out of piled earth, with broad terraces rising about 5 meters, stepped platforms carrying U-shaped structures, long rectangular mounds, and conical pyramids that climbed as high as 22 meters off the flat savanna floor. Every one of those shapes was raised by hand, load by load, out of the soil of the floodplain itself. From those cores, raised causeways ran out dead straight in every direction, for kilometers at a stretch, and they tied the big sites to smaller ones, while canals and reservoirs carried and held water across the floodplain. Inside the 204 square kilometers the team mapped, they counted 26 settlement sites arranged in 4 tiers, and the wider Kasarabe region, surveyed on foot in earlier years, had already logged 189 large mound sites and close to 957 kilometers of canals and causeways. The paper landed in Nature on the 25th of May 2022, and the claim inside it was blunt. What the LiDAR had found was a city, and not a scattering of huts either, but a planned, low-density kind of urbanism that indigenous people of the Kasarabe culture built and ran between roughly AD 500 and 1400. It was the first case of its kind anyone had ever documented in the Amazon lowlands. Low-density urbanism is a specific idea, and it matters here. These were not dense stone cities packed behind a wall, but sprawling settlements where monumental cores, garden plots, ponds, and smaller satellite towns were stitched together by the causeways and canals into one continuous managed whole. The water network was the spine of it. On a plain that drowns and dries every year, the canals drained off the wet season, and the reservoirs stored against the dry, and without that engineering, none of the rest could have stood. It was a way of building a city that fit the forest instead of clearing it, which is exactly why it stayed invisible from the ground and from the air, until a laser finally read the shape of the dirt. For most of the last century, the mundane explanation for the empty map was simply that the Amazon was empty. The going view held that the rainforest was close to pristine, a wilderness with soils too poor to feed a city. So, if the maps showed nothing, that was because nothing had ever been there. The LiDAR broke that idea. The soil had been worked, the water had been engineered, and the ground itself had been shaped into pyramids and roads by people who held this place for 900 years. So if the cities were always there, the blankness on your screen has to come from somewhere else. Part of it is simple because most of these places have never been surveyed at all, and a study led by Vinicius Peripato, published in Science in 2023, modeled that somewhere between about 10,000 and 24,000 large sites are still hidden across Amazonia, and most of them sit in the southwest, in the exact ground no one has scanned. But part of the blankness is deliberate. Across the field, researchers have started to keep precise coordinates out of their published data on purpose. When Martti Parsinen of the University of Helsinki led a survey that mapped more than 20,000 pre-colonial earthworks in southwest Amazonia, his team removed every image of a site that fell inside a demarcated indigenous territory before they released the rest, because a public picture can hand a looter the exact spot or expose a place a community holds sacred. So the greatest of these earthworks stay unlabeled, not because no one found them, but because the people who found them decided the map was not owed the answer. The empty tile is a choice as much as an accident. This is the last of them, the final structure in a long line of shapes that sat in plain sight until someone finally looked from above. And that is the thing to carry out of all of it, from the square drawn in raised mounds on the Kazakh steppe to the cities buried under the Bolivian canopy. The structures are there. The labels are not. And the reason a label is missing is sometimes that nobody has looked yet, and sometimes that the people who found it chose, on purpose, to leave the space blank. We started in Kazakhstan, where 101 mounds hold a square that only the sky can read. In Algeria, a fortress climbs 3 stories out of the sand, and no excavation report names the people who built it. Jordan gave us stone rings so wide that a person standing inside one never sees a circle close. In Saudi Arabia, flat stone rectangles run across the lava, and they were laid down before the first pyramid rose in Egypt. Senegal and Gambia together hold more than 1,000 stone circles, and no field of them anywhere runs larger. A green hill in Indonesia may keep something older inside it, and the researchers still argue over how far down the building goes. In Cambodia, Lida pulled the jungle back, and the lost Khmer capital stood up off the mountain. Mexico kept a city of 40,000 foundations folded into a lava field, and no map had ever counted them. In Peru, mounds the size of pyramids sit in open daylight, and the official registry leaves the space beside them blank. And in the Bolivian Amazon, cities with earthen mounds 22 meters tall came back on LIDAR, but the exact coordinates were held back on purpose. Every one of these places is real, and every one of them is standing right now, and yet the map goes quiet exactly where they are. The structures are there. The labels are not. That silence is not only cloud cover and old satellite passes, because a person somewhere decides what earns a name and what stays an empty tile. And empty is a decision as much as an accident. So tell me in the comments which one you would stand in front of if you could only choose a single site from all 10. And tell me if there is an empty tile near you, a field or a mound or a stretch of ground that everyone drives past and nobody has bothered to name. If you want more nights like this, subscribe and stay a while, because there are more of these long films on the way, more places the map left off, and I build every one of them to be watched from the first minute to the last.